I'm Joe Abraham. I'm a physician here in town. I'm semi-retired. This is my book, Kings, Conquerors, Psychopaths. It was published in 2018 by the UL Press. In 2020, I recovered the rights and published under my own imprint. It just won its 6th award. And if you go to the Amazon page, some rather impressive authors and scholars have been very, very complimentary of it. One of the ideas I want to talk about is progress and what we need to do both in government and industry to remain competitive, to continue to progress. And as a way of illustration, it is helpful to think of Pharaoh. We'll go back all the way to Narmer, the Narmer Palette in 3100 BCE. And if we were to take him and move him to the medieval period and show him around, he would see nothing that would surprise him. There had not been much change in technology. We were still working wood and stone and metal in pretty much the same ways they had been 4,000 years before. If you were then to take Pharaoh and transport him not to the medieval, but to, say, 1776 Paris or London, he would be very impressed, and he would see things that were very ornate and very elaborate. He would see a lot of luxury, but you still wouldn't present him with much technology that he didn't understand. In fact, I can only think of 3 things: gunpowder, the telescope, and the magnetic compass. If you can think of any others, please let me know. But it makes for an interesting dinner conversation. What would Pharaoh not have recognized in 1776 Paris or London? Now, take one of the founders of this country, bring him to the modern day and show him around. Imagine the things that he would completely not understand, and in fact, if he were a particular religious perspective, would think were diabolical. Things that could not happen. This was magic, this was the devil's work. Airplanes, automobiles, submarines, aircraft carriers, open heart surgery, neurosurgery, space travel, antibiotics, maglev trains, tarmac roads, asphalt roads, things over and over, even simple things like a simple wooden fence, which certainly he had, but the uniformity of the wood, and when you tell him how quickly it was made and how inexpensively, it would be beyond his comprehension. And in fact, you can turn that question around and ask yourself, what would he see? And I'm saying he because the founders were all he. What would he see that would not amaze him? Other than nature itself, even things that every 18th century gentleman understood well, livestock, farming, that would have baffled him. Our cows are twice as large per weight. We get 4 times the yield per acre. Everything about the modern world would baffle him, stun him, and shock him. And so the point of this is that what happened? What happened since 1776? And what happened is progress. This is kind of amazing for us to think. We are so used to progress, but in previous times, progress was not considered a good thing. In fact, it was considered heresy. A new idea, a new procedure. You didn't do that. You did it the way it had always been done. And for 10,000 years of civilization, there was almost no progress. Almost all progress that is taken in humanity has taken place since 1776, but really in the last 100, 120 years. Almost everything we enjoy. And I need to make a comment here. Today we have a political tension between political progressives and conservatives, and I would urge conservatives to be careful in their language about that because nobody's opposed to progress. We have to have progress. Every community, every nation, in order to be competitive, to be relevant, to be significant, has got to create progress. But in the past, like I said, it did not happen. So if we look forward in time, progress is new, and it's threatening to our way of life. A lot of our political struggles today are because things are moving very, very quickly. Whether or not their progress remains to be seen. But if you look back, it was a threat to Pharaoh, the king, and monarchs. Okay? So why? Why is progress new? How did this happen? To understand that, you need to understand that before the modern period, the world was run by monarchs, kings, pharaohs, and basically they were dictators. But to understand them, you have to ask, where did kings come from? Well, kings were descended from conquerors. Well, who are conquerors? Conquerors are vicious criminals. These are people who come in and murder and steal from people. And so we have a real interesting problem. Conquest is murder and theft. Conquerors were vicious criminals. Vicious criminals become kings. Kings design civilization, and you and I are the products of civilization. And so what we have is this dysfunction worked through so much of what we do. Conquerors were serial killers. Okay? We talk about John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy, you know, someone who grabs a person and does something awful. Napoleon walked through the streets in the middle of the day, slaughtering everyone, children, babies, and the horrific tortures and sexual excesses, and again, not just on women, on everybody. The soldier was free to do whatever he wanted. It was just horrific. So these were the people who founded civilization. Kings were never kind, wise, nor generous. They were always vicious. And if they weren't vicious, they were knocked off by somebody who was. Well, serial killers suffer from a particular problem that we call malignant narcissism. It has a standard term in psychiatry, the deadly tetrad. That comprises psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and sadism. Now, those aren't always what people think they are. Despite a lot of movies suggesting otherwise, psychopaths are not inherently evil people. They simply lack empathy. And often they don't have any empathy for themselves either. They're thrill seekers because they're kind of reckless. They just lack that empathy. Narcissists, we understand pretty well, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. Machiavellians are not only misunderstood by the layman, they're often misunderstood by the professionals. I don't have time to go into that. But a Machiavellian is simply someone who is ruthless, who is going towards some goal and will do what they have to do to get there, which is not always a bad thing. If you need trauma surgery, you want a Machiavellian. You want somebody who's going to do what it takes to get the job done. Same thing in any crisis. And then there's sadism, which actually surprisingly does not have a formal definition under the American Psychiatric Association. But for our purposes here, we're simply going to say that the sadist is someone who derives some sort of enjoyment. And it can be very broad, from the pain, suffering, or death of others. I'll come back to that too. The main one, though, to understand the modern period and to understand the problem we have with government and corporation and all large organizations is the narcissism. Okay? Narcissism comprises 9 in the American Psychiatric Association. There are other schemata. 9 criteria: grandiosity, fantasies of power, success, intelligence, attractiveness, self-perception of being superior or even unique, needing constant admiration of others, a sense of entitlement to special treatment and to obedience. That one's going to be very important. Exploitative of others without any concern for their feelings. They are unwilling to empathize. They are intentionally envious of others, and they assume that everyone is envious of them. And they have a pompous and arrogant demeanor. And what you realize looking back is almost all monarchs were narcissists. The elaborate castles, the need to be the center of everything, every decision they had to make. It was always about them, about them, about them. They couldn't have their image on enough portraits or enough busts or enough coins. They had to constantly be the center of attention. That narcissism we inherit in the world today, and I'm going to explain that a little bit better, but it presents 2 critical problems to progress. 1, no one can criticize the narcissist. And 2, no one can be better, greater, smarter, or have a better idea than the narcissist. Okay? One example of the inability to criticize the king, we have the story of the emperor's new clothes. We're all familiar with that. But the fact of the matter is, if a child had stood up and said the king is naked, everyone wouldn't have looked at him with wonder. He'd have been slaughtered on the spot, probably. At the very least, he and his family would have been ruined. And if you think that sounds absurd, Kim Jong-il, I never can keep the three Korean dictators straight. Kim Jong-il, under his reign, a family could be jailed for an unruly or disobedient child. The whole family would go to jail. And so when you wonder why our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents were so strict with children, why children were seen and not heard, why they were expected to instantly obey, it wasn't because of some old tradition without meaning. It was because in previous times, an unruly child could ruin the whole family. The narcissist did not want disorder, and he did not want anything to embarrass his presence. So before 1776, the world was run by narcissism, and in many ways it still is. That is the crisis of the modern world. Our leaders operate within a professional space of narcissism. And you're thinking, wait a minute, I know some elected officials, I know some CEOs, they aren't necessarily narcissists. That's not what I'm saying. And understand, we need to, I'll give you the example of the Army general, who may be a great father, a great husband, a great neighbor, gives to his church, gives his time to his community, very kind and very generous. But what happens the moment he puts on his helmet, his battle helmet? Okay? He becomes a full-blown malignant narcissist. He is absolutely psychopathic toward the enemy, and to a certain extent toward his own men. He may care about them deeply at some intellectual level, but a good general has got to be able to sacrifice his own men when necessary. He becomes very narcissistic, maybe not about himself personally, but about his office, about the dignity of his rank, and about his side. Our side will dominate. Your side will be subjugated. It is about us being superior. It is about us winning. He is also Machiavellian. He is absolutely moving towards some goal without any concern for the repercussions to anyone in the way. And finally, he's a sadist. Now you think, general's not a sadist. Think about this, you're in a firefight and somebody shoots the sniper on the other side. What does everybody do? They're all pumped, they're all excited. You hit a moving military craft on the other side. Everybody's excited. Remember, when SEAL Team 6 went in and took out Osama bin Laden, sleepy Joe Biden and low-energy Obama sat there and they were pumped. They were excited about this. Now, this isn't what we normally think of as sadism, but in a war, you become very, very interested in inflicting damage to the other side. So it has a sadistic quality to it. And so the CEO, in a similar way, doesn't, well, he's not a full narcissist. He doesn't need the sadism. He may be a psychological sadist. We've all seen that before. But he does have to be a narcissist as soon as he steps behind his desk. He's got to be unfeeling about the competition and anybody who gets in the way. He's got to be narcissistic about his corporation, his office, his mission. And he has to be absolutely Machiavellian. And we catch corporations all the time doing highly unethical things to accomplish what they perceive as their mission. So what happened in 1776? What is America? And at one point I asked my friends, can you define America in one word? What is America? And the word that came up the most often was freedom, which is interesting, and it's not entirely wrong, but it's not entirely right either. Okay? First of all, you don't have complete freedom. We can't kill one another. We can't steal from one another. We can't do all sorts of things. We can't poison the atmosphere or the water or the land. There are entire law libraries filled with the things that we are not allowed to do. Okay? So we don't have total freedom. We have to have a certain balance of freedom. It has to be a certain level. If you go to too little freedom, then obviously you end up back under some sort of a monarch, a power, a lord, a warlord, or someone like that. If you go too far towards freedom, though, without any restraint, well, now all of a sudden you've gone into anarchy and chaos, which is a temporary condition, because what will happen? A warlord will appear and go take you all the way back to where we started, back to the past, where there is one powerful person who subjugates the rest of us. So, and with that too, you need to understand that even under those old systems, the serf still had some freedoms. Even the slave had some free time, had some free options. So it's always a relative amount. There is no absolute freedom. And the Chinese may solve this with their supervision, but so far no one has figured out how to strip all of our freedoms from us. So if that is not the word, then what would be the word? And for that I want to give you a sort of a thought experiment, or rather a problem. Say we needed to launch a projectile 1 million miles and have it land within 2 or 3 millimeters of the desired target. Do you think that's possible? Well, actually, we do it. It's called the Space Shuttle. It's kind of ironic. The space station is only about 8-9 miles in the sky, but the space station, in order to get to the right velocity, sync itself with the space station, and then dock, has to travel over 1 million miles. And then once it docks, it is within a few millimeters of where it needs to be. So how does that happen? It happens with the word I want to discuss, which is feedback. Okay? You take off, and as soon as you're in space, constantly you're checking. Where are we located? Where's the Earth located? Where's the space station located? If by some chance there's a piece of space debris, where is that? And you're constantly adjusting. You're constantly making corrections. And then when you get to the space station, and in fact, the pilot only has to be within 3 feet of the right place, which is still pretty impressive considering the size and velocity. They're both moving at about 17,500 miles an hour when they dock. And from there on, you have a mechanical system that maneuvers it that last little bit. But again, it's a mechanical feedback system. Feedback's important in medicine. The most complex system we know of in the universe is the human body. And Harvard physiologist Walter Buchanan is the one who gave us the idea of homeostasis. Your temperature, different parts of your body go back and forth. Your thyroid gland, your hormones, different systems are constantly adjusting. Your salt balances, your oxygen balances, your carbon dioxide balances. There is no absolute. Everything has to be held in a balance. Okay? And that is done through these really complicated feedback loops. And as I think back on it, my medical training, a lot of what we were learning about is how those feedback loops work. And it's also important when you're trying to design a new product, right? You design the product, you make one, doesn't work, feedback, you change it, you try it again, you feedback. This is what R&D is, constant feedback. Then you put it out in the market and you get more feedback. Okay? So our freedom is our freedom for feedback. Free elections is our right to give feedback to our elected officials. Free markets are our right to give feedback to corporations. And freedom of expression allows us to give feedback to anyone we want. So that's really, if you think about it, what we rebelled for. No taxation without representation, okay? We want feedback. You can't come in and interfere with our markets. You can't interfere with the feedback of that free market. And you cannot interfere with our right to complain and our right to petition the king and the nobles. What we wanted was the freedom for feedback. Now, there is a second concept that we need to include, but it's a required part of feedback. And I have to explain that. That is equality. Because you can't criticize, you can't give feedback to someone who has power over you. This is one of the reasons we have the privacy of the ballot box, so there can't be any revenge. This is one of the reasons we have whistleblower laws to protect those who reveal things we need to know, things that the powerful would keep hidden from us. Okay? You're not allowed to criticize those above you. That is why a certain level of equality is important. And you may think, well, but that's not necessarily true. But think about it with your children. Your children were not your equal. But I think for all good parents, at the time comes, we sit down, put our arm around our kid, and we say, you were right and I was wrong. And Papa apologizes. And at that point, you're equals. And I give my children, as I suspect many of you did, My children can criticize me. They are allowed to disagree with me. They have to do it politely, but it is their right. They can tell me, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. I think that is a mistake. The only limit is they have to do it respectfully. So there's always, in a feedback system, in a feedback loop, there's the necessity for some sort of equality. And indeed, we can criticize the president. We can criticize our elected officials. We can criticize powerful people and famous people. But here's where we run into the problem, is when we go into the corporation. Because again, we can't criticize those who have power over us. And one of the characteristics of a bureaucracy is information always flows downhill. It does not go up, okay? But it's critical. If we are to maintain competitive corporations, they need to understand these ideas and how to facilitate feedback and some level of equality, okay? When you don't listen to your customers, your employees, and your suppliers, your corporation will lose money. And we could make the argument that the corporation has a fiduciary responsibility to its stockholders to do these things. But you lose money in two ways. First of all, you don't correct mistakes, and so you're losing money there. But you're also leaving money on the table because those same groups of people are going to inform you about new possibilities and new avenues for profits, okay? So those two are real important for progress and for moving forward. But there is yet another reason why that equality is so important. Okay. Some of you may have heard this story. So there's this truck, this delivery truck. It's driving somewhere. It has to pass under an overpass. Turns out the truck is 2 inches too high for the overpass, and it slams under it and gets stuck. Okay, and so the engineers and the suits and ties and everybody come out, and they're looking there, and they're weighing the merits of lifting up the segment of the bridge or cutting off the top of the truck. And there's some little kids sitting on the side watching it all, and one of them said, "Hey, mister, why don't you let the air out of the tires?" And I like that story because it leads to the next reason that equality is so important. If you don't listen, you're going to miss something. Somebody once said to me, this probably isn't very politically correct, every moron will have a good idea once in a while. If you're not listening, you will miss it. And that is what the real advantage, the real advance of equality was, okay? In essence, and I'm going to put this in computing terms, in essence, we went from a serial processor to a parallel processor. For those of you who don't understand, in the old type of computing, or in a former, that I don't think it's used anywhere, the processing of a computer was passed through a series of processors like this. And somebody said, wait a minute, spread them out so that they're all working on different parts of the problem together. This is what happens in the modern world. This is what happens with equality. This is what happened since 1776, and particularly since the beginning of the 20th century. All of a sudden, it isn't one king who has to be the smartest. It isn't one person who's in control. Everybody's allowed to contribute. And all of a sudden, people go out and they're suggesting ideas, and they're inventing new processes, and they're inventing new devices. And when that happens, the world takes off. This is what the world had waited 10,000 years to do, is to allow everyone to contribute, to allow that equality, to allow that feedback. And when it did, the modern world exploded. Freedom is very, very important, but we need to be free to try, we need to be free to experiment, and we need to be free to fail. And by the way, this is one of, a lot of people talk about how different we are down here. I will tell you that one of our advantages is, and if you think about this, is because Acadiana will allow you, the people here, will allow you to try things. You don't have to ask anybody permission. You can go out and just try things. That sounds strange to us, but I can remember a man in another town who wanted to start a business. He went to the most powerful man in town and asked him what he thought. I said, why did you do that? He said, oh, I wouldn't have started if he said he didn't think it was a good idea. Here, you do what you want to do. You start it. Don't do it in my front yard, but you can try anything you want. And here's the other aspect that is so important to South Louisiana and Acadiana and our Cajun Creole culture. If you fail, nobody holds it against you. You tried, you failed. What you want to try next? We don't have this idea that I don't want to associate with a failure, and that a failure is a complete failure, which again is one of the problems we derive from the narcissism of the king. So, in summary, for the world to progress, we have to abandon narcissism. We have to create systems where all large organizations are more open to feedback and criticism, and we need systems that regard others as equals, as people who all can contribute, and who will contribute if you listen. If the United States, our corporations, our nonprofits, any organizations are to remain competitive and relative, they need to find ways to grow feedback and grow equality. Thank you.